Okay, we have a question here from Julius. Is Julius here? Yeah. No. They've all let us down, haven't they? Perhaps they just threw the question in and ran. So we have talked on some of this, but I think it would be useful to open up the debate about what proportion of UK energy do you think needs to be generated by renewable sources by 2050? And do you and your party, or you and your business, support onshore wind farms and solar arrays, for example, across the Cotswolds? As you may well know, onshore wind farms are currently more or less impossible to get going because of protest. And if somebody protests and doesn't want one, then they don't get built. So it's effectively a ban, as far as I'm aware. Let's start with Julie. Julie, what proportion of UK energy do you think needs to be generated by renewable sources by 2050? And do you and Labour support onshore wind farms and solar arrays, for example, across the Cotswolds?
Right, okay. Now this is where my lack of detailed knowledge about climate change and net zero comes in. I don't know what proportion we should be aiming for by 2050, but as much as possible, I would think. We're certainly committed to net zero by 2030, and we'll be doing everything we can to invest in new technologies, both in terms of manufacturing, as in terms of stuff that we already know about, but also investing in R&D to develop new ways forward. Do we support onshore wind farms? Yes, and also offshore wind farms. I think floating wind farms is being talked about a lot. It's not a technology I'm particularly familiar with, but I know we will be looking at doing everything we can to work with renewable sources and ways of generating power. So there will be plans to improve the planning system to allow those developments to take place and to encourage as much of variety as possible to come from renewable sources. But the actual figures I can't say at the moment.
Thank you. I'll talk to Tabi, if I may. Tabi, what do the Greens think about onshore wind and what percentage of onshore wind and solar farms, and what percentage of renewables do you think should come from UK energy from renewables by 2050?
I think probably a lot of people can anticipate what my response would be. Yes, of course. Sorry, I'm so bad at this. I kind of feel like a lot of you will be able to anticipate what my response to this would be. I kind of feel like 2050 is probably not soon enough, in fairness. But when you think about the subsidies that are being given to fossil fuel generation, like just the fact that still exists as a thing is quite shocking. And actually, having worked at Ecotricity, like full disclosure, from I think around 2013 to 2018, I was there standing slightly gobsmacked when Eric Pickles kind of did the whole onshore wind thing and just annihilated the entire industry overnight. That was quite... I mean, it's frustrating because you kind of really want to have resilient energy generation measures because, battery storage is a really, really big one. There are many different mechanisms of energy storage now. And it's quite exciting sort of seeing what's possible. It's not even just necessarily lithium batteries anymore. It's kind of an emerging science, which is very exciting. But I kind of feel like you kind of really want to have sort of smart local grid systems as well, so that you can have locally generated electricity to make sure that it reduces the risk of power blackouts. If we were to remove the subsidies, they're often locked in. It's a really promising step, the fact that we've left the Energy Charter Treaty. That was really good news this year. It's still going to take several years to recover from that. But just the fact that fossil fuel companies were in a position to sue the governments of countries for taking climate-friendly mitigation policies, it's really bad that was even a thing. So I kind of feel as though hopefully the landscape is changing to... I understand that a lot of people are a bit frustrated about onshore wind. They kind of think it's quite unappealing, but it's always worth remembering that onshore wind farms, they only have a lifespan around 25 years before they're decommissioned. So, that's kind of in some ways the bridging fuel that they always said gas would be. Onshore wind can be a 25-year thing, and then you basically take the whole thing down and we'll have another technology that supersedes that. So it's kind of a temporary grief in some ways for anyone who's stressed out about onshore wind. It's not as destructive as a lot of people say. And you can also kind of tactically plan wind farms so that they are taking into account migration patterns of birds. There's actually an onshore wind development in northern Spain where they can actually tell when birds are migrating past, so they can switch them off so the birds can navigate around them. So again, the technology is very exciting. Again, sorry talking a lot about it.
I think we're getting some feedback from the microphone on this side.
It's not too fast at all.
It's a bit slower and
Sorry.
a bit louder. Thank
Sorry,
you.
this is my hyperfixation. I get
I'll come
excited.
to Alex for this one, thank you. Alex, what's the UK government,
Sure.
what's the Conservative position on UK energy,
Yep.
which you mentioned,
Great.
and also onshore wind farms?
Sure. Well, in terms of energy production, remember, of course, we have legally binding targets, which is net zero by 2050, as you know. And that was a target, a legally binding target, which was created in Cheltenham. So it started from a conversation with young people at Bourneside School. It then became a private member's bill, which I took into Parliament, and then in the Theresa May government, that became the law of the land. So that is the reason why we have net zero, is because of Cheltenham. So that's just something to be aware of. So specifically, as I look at the grid at the moment, we're producing around about 29 gigawatts of energy. That's what's running us. So in terms of our targets, we've got already installed offshore, by the way, more offshore wind generation capability than any other nation on the planet apart from China. We already have installed about 28 gigawatts worth, so if that was all running full tilt, it would be powering us entirely now. But the aim is to get to 50 gigawatts by 2030. Why is that important? Because you need to have additional power so that you can do green hydrogen. So if you want to extract hydrogen, which as you all know from your electrolysis, lots of clever people in this room, you need loads and loads of power to do so. So wind, 50 gigawatts by
Alex,
2030.
could you just tell us what 20 gigawatts is in percentage terms?
Well, 20 gigawatts of 50 is 40% of that.
I mean, yeah, we're looking at what's the percentage.
So the total amount we're using for the entirety of the United Kingdom at the moment is 28 gigawatts. So that's what we're using. So we're looking at, for offshore wind alone, the thick end of double that capacity simply on offshore wind. So that's the plan. So it's close to double, a bit over 90%. So that's the first one. Nuclear, we think, should be part of the mix. At the moment, it's producing about 5 gigawatts. We think it should be 24 gigawatts by 2050. Yes, it's very expensive, but France did it. France, I think, was right to do it. Bluntly, they have really significant baseload capacity, which I think we should have done with the benefit of hindsight. We're turning that around.
And then tell people what
sure.
that means in terms of percentage, because I don't know that people would really understand what
So
we're talking about in gigawatts.
A gigawatt. So there's
Percentage of UK usage.
Right, well, the UK usage at the moment is about 28 gigawatts, as I was saying. We range between 20 and 40, so when everyone goes to sleep at night, about 4 o'clock in the morning, we'll be using about 20 gigawatts. When everyone gets up in the morning and they switch on their kettle, about 9 o'clock, we'll get up to, particularly if it's a cold day, we'll get to about 39, 40 gigawatts, something like that. So that's broadly it. And so where we want to get to with nuclear is 24 gigawatts, around about, a little over half that. And then also solar. So we have installed about 8 gigawatts at the moment. We want to get that up to 5 times that, so 40 gigawatts by 2035. And the reason why we want more than we need is because you have to have that in order to do some of the incredibly energy-intensive stuff. If you want to build a wind turbine, you've got to create steel. If you want to run arc furnaces, you need a lot of power. You can't, it just doesn't magic it up. If you want to create green hydrogen rather than blue hydrogen, which is defeating the objects, is all through methane, if you want to do it with electricity, you need a massive surfeit of power. That's why we've got to build it. And here's the final point. We will only be able to do that if we have a growing economy. And to that first point, is we have to generate the individual tax revenues so that allows us to innovate in that way. And it's only by doing that that we'll get where we need to go. Thank you.
Thank you. And to you, Max.
Thank you. I'll keep it brief because I think most of the key points have already been made. The Liberal Democrat position is that by 2030 we would have the UK generating 80% of our power from renewable sources and next to nothing by the time you get to 2050. The Lib Dem policy is for a target sooner than 2050 for net zero. My view is that you need to set more stretching targets, otherwise you definitely don't get there because, let's face it, the country mostly misses most of its targets most of the time. The nuclear power was at 17% in 2018, but is projected probably to fall. The ambitions for it to increase, I think, are probably going to be the right thing. we don't all like nuclear power, but it is possibly the least of all the worst options in the scenarios that you look at as you go to the future and you look at whether you're keeping the lights on using coal or gas or nuclear. The waste is going to be there and we will have to deal with that, but nuclear will be there as part of the transition as we go to the forms of power that have been mentioned in the question. And I think we all need to be very much more relaxed about onshore wind power. I think the government took the wrong decision when they decided effectively to ban onshore wind, and that needs to be overturned as soon as possible, and the Liberal Democrats would do that. And in terms of solar arrays, well, they're not always the most attractive things. It's already happening. If you go around the country, you will see them in the countryside all over the place, and in the Cotswolds, there are already solar arrays in various parts of it, not necessarily in Cotswolds district, but the wider region that you would call the Cotswolds. So it's already happening, and we are putting up with that quite nicely. We'll need to put up with an awful lot more.
Thank you. And Ian, any comments?
Well, I think it's very simple from my point of view. I mean, I'm agreeing very strongly with most of what Alex and Max have said, which is, we need to have 100% zero carbon energy by a lot sooner than 2050, 2035 at the latest, I would say. I suspect you're right that nuclear, unfortunately, has to be a part of that. As much of it should be renewable as possible, but we have to be realistic too. I just would like to say something to all of the parliamentary candidates on the subject of net zero. We've led the world in having a net zero target. It's fantastic, but we need to lead the world again, because our net zero target at the moment doesn't actually cover all of the emissions generated by the people living in this country, because it doesn't include the emissions associated with all the products that we import, which is around about 40%. I'm not knocking what we've done so far. It's absolute leadership, but we need to keep going and show that further leadership.
Thank you.
Is Ian going to tell us about scope 3 measurements and what your business can do to help?
No, I'm not.
Oh.
I'm not here to do an advert, no.
Well, I'm sure he can help you out. We've spoken about it.
Thank you. Given what the time is now, it's 1:45, I'm going to do one last question, and then I want to actually open it up to the floor just to see if there's any other questions remaining. So the question is actually, it's probably only really going to be directed at Alex, but it is a question that does get asked, which is, will the sitting MP and Westminster candidates, so it's maybe more, give wholehearted support to the Climate and Nature Bill recently presented to Parliament? And if not, why not?
Yes.
I'm not entirely sure about that. I genuinely, I'm the Justice Secretary, so I have to look at that. It's not something I've looked at the details in, but what I can say is this. We are committed to ensuring that we decarbonise faster than the United States, than Canada, than France, than Germany, than Italy, and indeed other countries. That is incredibly important. As for the details, I always look at the bill before I decide which way I'm going to vote on it, but I have to say I haven't had the opportunity to do so.
Is the government supportive of it at the moment? Because you can sign up online. I would thank Anthony Oliver, who's probably in the room, who sent me. I didn't realise that candidates were being asked to sign up, but I did yesterday. So you can all go and check online.
Thank you, and I'd like to thank Trudy for that question. Is Trudy here? She's done a runner too. Well, there you go. Oh, no, hello, Trudy. Thank you for the question. So we've got a few minutes left. We've got 15 minutes left. Can we take some questions from the audience? That would be really nice. I'll take them just randomly. If you'd like to stand up, I can see you. Actually, I can see this gentleman just here with a check shirt, and we've got a roving mic for you. And if you could let us know if it's directed at any particular member of the panel, that would be really useful.
Thanks. Just to make the point that electricity generation is now not a big sector in terms of carbon emissions. It was when coal was being used to produce electricity, but now it's below transport, industry, even agriculture. So there hasn't been much discussion about those other sectors on the panel tonight. Just wondering whether you want to say something about that.
To anyone in particular?
Who's got something to say?
Please
Can I say, I respectfully, I'll try and speak that hopefully you hear. I completely agree with you. So you're spot on. So in 2010, the big emitters were Battersea Power Station, all these things were emitting a huge amount of power in order to generate electricity. Now it's not that, it's transport. And so when people say, and I speak to young people in schools, whether it's Bournemouth or Bauhaus or say it's Pip or wherever it is, and they say, how can we decarbonise? And the truth is, actually, although it's very worthy to ensure you recycle the paper and stuff like that, the key stuff is ensuring you have a good active transport plan, for example. The big thing that we have not been successful on, I'm perfectly prepared to admit this, is if you go to the Netherlands, something like 35% of all journeys under 2 miles are active travel. So they're on bike or they're on foot. In Britain, it's about 2%. We just don't get it.
I count the number of cars I pass on my walk from where I live to Leckhampton.
That's a lot.
I count, and people and bikes.
Well, listen.
How many people and how many bikes
not enough cyclists. So look, I think the central point you make is a good one. So I cycle everywhere. I think it's an incredibly great, good way to get around. The truth is there are not enough. I'll probably get in trouble for saying this, but it's true. Has the advantage of being true. There aren't enough women on bikes because typically you have to have more safety measures to encourage more. It's just statistically it's the case. I don't know why. Answers on a postcard. I'm not sure. But we have to have better safety measures in order to encourage people onto bikes. If we do that, that will be the single biggest thing we can do to reduce carbon emissions. So I completely agree with what you're saying.
Thank you. Anybody else like to respond to that? Yeah, Max? Do you want to respond to that?
I didn't hear what you said. I think you said agriculture, but I didn't hear. Did you sort of talk about transport and construction as well?
Emissions from agriculture, which have been traditionally quite low, quite level, they're even now above electricity production. So electricity production is really fallen
the
off.
success of the decarbonisation of the grid we've covered at some length.
Yeah, but it does leave those other sectors now that we're not really talking about, and now that's where we need to be looking.
Can I just get you to clarify what the question is, because I'm not quite sure anymore.
I can repeat if you. If you still got the microphone.
So people can hear, that would be lovely.
So if we consider the sectors in the UK that emit carbon emissions, that they are electricity production. So that was a big one a few years ago. But there's also industry, transport, buildings, so heating and cooling of buildings, and agriculture. So the big emitter now is transport and buildings.
And what's your question?
So the question is, I guess my point is, we're not really talking about those things. We've talked a lot about generation of electricity, which is important, but we now need to talk about those other things because they're the big emitters now, not electricity production.
Thank you.
So on buildings, I'll put a shout out to Cheltenham's supplementary planning document, and it's not a particularly exciting thing to talk about, the supplementary planning document on climate change, which actually is making a huge difference to the new buildings that are being built in Cheltenham. We're seeing the private sector housing developers bringing forward net zero houses, which are being built to very high standards now, and that will apply equally to commercial buildings as well, because you're absolutely right. We can't solve this problem if we don't solve the problems with the carbon that's both created during the construction process, so with the making of the things that go into the building, and then the use of the buildings later on. Now, net zero in construction is very difficult to achieve if you talk to people who work in the construction industry. Net zero in use is somewhat easier, and the technology is already there. So when we're talking about the new houses that are being built in Cheltenham, and the Miller planning application at Leckhampton was not universally popular in Cheltenham, it's fair to say, but it is a lot less bad than it otherwise would have been because of our supplementary planning document. The Borough Council turned it down on climate grounds because it was going to be on gas grid. Miller appealed, they went to appeal, and they capitulated on all of the environmental points the Borough Council made before the appeal was heard. So that building, that development will now be off gas grid as a result. And we're setting new and very good high standards in Cheltenham as a result of the work that's been done locally. So we can be quite satisfied, but there is always much further to go. On the point about transport, you're absolutely right. Part of it is decarbonising the use of the vehicles that we've got. Another part is just stopping using the vehicles quite so much. I would say that the County Council needs to bring forward more cycle paths more quickly. The national picture that the Conservatives are putting forward, unfortunately, is not quite so pro-cycling and walking as it was when Boris Johnson was in charge. And as a Liberal Democrat, it's difficult for me to say nice things about Boris Johnson, but he was right about walking and cycling. That is the silver bullet, not just to part of the problem with decarbonising transport, but also to our public health crisis that we've got in this country as well. And whisper it quietly, because Rishi Sunak says we're not having more low-traffic neighbourhoods built anywhere in the country. He doesn't really like them. Cheltenham's had them for decades. You can walk around town and you can see them in Wellington Square, in Clarence Square, in Clyde Crescent, and a new one is just being put in through Pitville Park, as I understand it, as part of the cycle spine. Now, I wouldn't use the phrase LTN, because I think that is now, it's loaded as a term, and it is a thing that people see as a negative. But actually, if you're talking about communities that people can walk more easily and cycle more easily in, and walk easily to and cycle easily to, and where children are respected much more than they currently are by the transport system that we have, then I think that must be a good thing.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. You're absolutely right. The other point I'd like to make is great to hear what's going on with new build and the planning there. The other big issue, the really massive issue which I haven't spoken about at all, is what to do with all the existing old houses. And you know, I'd love to know what all of the parties are going to do about fitting insulation, refitting all the heating, and doing something about all the existing housing stock, because that's a far bigger question than new houses. And planning is very important. I've got a client who run a guest house in Cheltenham. Last year they weren't allowed to put secondary double glazing in their premises, which wouldn't really have been visible from the street. And the letter they got from the planning was quite extraordinary. They were gobsmacked that they were even asking. And I think, well, Cheltenham has declared a climate emergency here. Who are we saving the past for? You know, and so, you know, please, that would be nice.
Nobody's mentioned. Oh, hello. Thanks. Yeah. Okay. Nobody's mentioned plastic. According to my stats, plastic accounts for around 20% of global carbon emissions. The problem with plastic is it doesn't go away, and it's damaging our health. It's damaging our wildlife. What can we do about that? No, globally. Well, UK-wide, sorry, not globally, but starting with Cheltenham, yeah.
So this is actually one of the things that haunts me almost. Why does this keep happening? Freddie Mercury style. Okay, let's try and go.
I told them to think they were Freddie Mercury.
That did help. Okay. Oh, that's a bit better. Okay. So yeah, you're right. Plastic is a huge problem. Not just for all the reasons you described. To be honest, having been elected 2 years ago into local council, just the fact that we are responsible for waste and recycling handling, it often crosses my mind. Why is it something that the taxpayer ultimately has to pick up the bucket for? It's pretty much manufacturers just kind of routinely doing it. We know who's responsible. It's there are basically 10 major polluters who are just putting everything in plastic to a ridiculous extent. And I kind of feel like it would be useful to change the dynamic. Again, it's collective instead of individualistic. It's actually ideally going back to the manufacturers and actually just having that conversation. That, why are we filling up landfills? Why are we creating incinerators? Why are we basically creating all this infrastructure to just deal with a problem that could be avoided if we had bottle recycling, bottle deposit schemes, or just a more creative. I know that Alex was very keen on a bottle recycling deposit scheme at Marks and Spencer a couple of years ago. So it kind of feels a bit like there are some solutions, and it does require recontextualizing our relationship with the things that we actually own and the things that we interact with. And you do need to kind of take it to the big manufacturers, the big polluters. It's kind of one of those things where it feels a bit futile to separate out your household recycling. If you then have loads of cast-off nets and ghost nets in the oceans, if you kind of have loads of basically huge corporations who are basically just generating super huge amounts. So there does need to be more regulation. It does need to be more responsive to the changing, the emerging kind of problems that we're seeing.
Thank you.
Definitely.
I won't pass this down just for time and also for balance, because I haven't taken a question from that side. Gentleman in the front row, if you don't mind.
Thank you. This was billed as climate and nature bill. Nobody's mentioned the word nature. 50% of the only reason we're alive is because of nature. Everyone is obsessing with carbon, and you're missing the biggest picture. We've already missed all our targets for carbon, and we're now in the hands of nature, not man, as to whether or not this experiment is going to work out. What are we going to do about nature? And Alex, I suggest you read the bill. It's only 9 pages long, and it links nature with climate. They're two sides of the same coin.
We'll bring this to a close. Vanessa, are we right to bring this to a close now? It's just got a couple of minutes. Finish with that question, yeah. So thank you, everybody. Thank you to the panel. Sorry. Oh, sorry. I didn't hear what... Oh, response, sorry. Let's have some response. Thank you. I was just worried about time.
Do I want to start? I'm glad you've raised that, actually, because one of the things that I was thinking about this whole event before I did any research and to try and answer some of your questions was looking at some of the work that From the Ground Up does and the work that Linda does about climate anxiety and climate change deniers and the whole psychology around that. This is coming to your point. And the bottom line really with all of this, I think, I get frustrated with the phrase save the planet. Because the truth is the planet will sort itself out. The planet is not at risk. What's at risk is life on this planet. Either animal life, insect life, and ultimately human life. Because if we don't get this sorted, our lives are going to be more and more, our ability to sustain life is going to become more and more challenged. And what we haven't talked about are the really doomsday scenarios where actually, you know, we're fighting over water, we're struggling to survive, every country is looking for its own survival, and we are in danger of ending up fighting each other over these things rather than cooperating. And, you know, this is the worst case scenario, but I think you're absolutely right that if we, you know, it's already too late in many ways. We've lost whole swathes of some species. And in fact, I was listening to, was it Vanessa or somebody saying the reason she got into all this, you, Linda, was realising that 80% of butterflies in some country had disappeared. Now, actually, those things will sort themselves out if we leave them to it and stop polluting the environment. But if we go on as we are, well, eventually they might, you know, perhaps not. The dinosaurs never came back, you know. But I think, you know, what really frightens people is that actually, if we don't get this right, our existence as a species is the ultimate price we will pay. And we don't want to think about that. It's too frightening. And that message, I think, has been deleted from the narrative because it's too frightening. But that is the bottom line. So what do we do about it? I don't know. But we have to really... Alex started by saying, this is, you know, we've really got to move on this. We really have got to move on this. And at the moment, I don't think any of us are doing enough or quickly enough.
Thank you. I'd like to... Oh, sorry. Alex. Yeah. I just want to say I wasn't trying to brush over your question because it's, for me, critical. I thought I was getting signals to wrap up, but I'm really glad we're continuing with your question.
No, so look, one of my secret passions is poetry. I love poetry. I love to read it. And one of the things that's striking is when you read these poems, you read about animals that you just don't see now. So if you're thinking about the larks still bravely singing fly and all these, and where are the larks? You know, where are the thrushes? Where are the goldfinches? Where are the... And so you're absolutely right. Now, we have to do some things on the international plane, where we cooperate with fellow nations, and we have to do stuff domestically. So on the international plane, we are one of the countries that signed up to the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, and that's about, you know that? You've got it? Okay. And that's about protecting 30% of the world's lands and ocean. But we also, in this country, control a huge amount of marine protected areas. As you know, in and around Ascension Island, the Falklands, and so many other areas, we have ensured that 38% of those waters are protected. So that's an important thing. But we've got to do more because your point is absolutely right. Can I just quickly say on the plastics thing, just very, very quickly, plastic bags down by 98%, that was 2015. We banned microbeads in personal care products. We did that in 2018. We introduced a plastic packaging tax in April 2022, which means that £200 per ton on plastic packaging, which doesn't have more than a third recycled plastic. And of course, in 2023, single-use plastic cutlery, balloon sticks, polystyrene cups, food containers, all verboten. So these are some important changes. Of course, it's not everything, but over the last 5 or 6 years, there have been some significant changes. Thank you.
We'll come to Tabi. Biodiversity loss, which is currently around about 60%.
Yeah, it's really quite striking, just the fact that how much of the UK landmass and our oceans really revolve around our economies of human consumption. What's really interesting, I was really excited to hear what Ian was mentioning earlier about how gross domestic product actually excludes nature. So basically, trees don't have a value until they appear in front of you as a table or a chair. It's only when they enter the market that they have a gross domestic product. They're reflected in that. So the language that we're using to talk about this stuff is actually incapacitated. Our motivations are kind of all wrong. I mean, you're right. We won't miss this stuff until it's just kind of gone. But we need to make sure we're empowering ourselves by using the right language. And actually, in some ways, having appreciation of these vast kind of complex systems that took millions of years to build. We cannot replicate some of the really great stuff that nature has created for itself. And when we come in with pesticide use that kind of annihilates those kind of fragile, delicate ecosystems, we can't just use things in a slapdash manner, using a sledgehammer to kind of crack a nut with these things. There's so much complexity that I would love to see more people appreciate, who are kind of key stakeholders. There's so much stuff that happens outside of our awareness. I'm really excited about the finding of the Wood Wide Web with mycorrhizal networks as well that are in forest systems. Those are in the soil, out of sight, but they still happen. I kind of feel like the whole David Attenborough effect of actually getting really passionate about what biodiversity is and what it could be. I'm really excited for some of the rewilding projects that are happening. It's really exciting seeing what's happening with the Gloucestershire Wildlife Trust, and they're taking loads of steps across the county to, particularly in rural areas. But I would really love to see more urban nature investment as well, because I think that's so important. And again, it's kind of rewarding people who care about this stuff with successes. So, Cheltenham's a great place for wildlife. We've seen kestrels perched on our fence. There's actually peregrine falcons nesting in, I think, Christchurch, I think it is. There's otters in Pittville Park, yeah. So this stuff is possible. It can happen. We can have keystone species like beavers who are kind of helping with flood mitigations up in, the Cotswold Escarpment. So the possibilities are really endless. We just have to kind of open our minds to the slight unpredictabilities of that. That's the joy of nature, just the fact that it is all kind of wild. We kind of need to stop micromanaging things a little bit, just try and take a step back and just let things take their course. It's exciting.
Ian, and then we'll come to Max.
I just want to say...
I just wonder if the otters are there because it's the cleanest place they could find.
I just say thank you, and it's a rebuke to us all, and you're right to do so, because you're right, the climate emergency, nature, biodiversity, completely intertwined. And actually, a lot of people find it hard to get worked up about taking action on climate, but most people are passionate about nature, so it's very important for us, everybody here does care about it, to keep making that link. And that's why the Climate and Nature Bill is very important, because it does link the two together. So I would, again, call on all the candidates here to read it and support it, please.
Thank you. Thank you. And to Max.
We're over time, and I've nothing to add to the points that have been made. I can tell you what the Lib Dem position is, which is to increase the area of protected land for nature and species from current 8% to at least 16%, so effectively doubling it, and we'd introduce a new Environmental Rights Act which would recognise everyone's human right to a healthy environment. And of course, as the Liberal Democrat candidate next election, I am supporting the Climate and Nature Bill, as you can see if you go on the website. Thank you again to Anthony.
Thank you for the question. Thank you, everybody. Now, I know we have to go quite quickly, so Vanessa, if I kind of thank you, everybody, thank you to the panel, but I'll let Vanessa do the thanks as well.
I think we're going to hear that. I just want to say thank you, everybody, very much for coming along this evening and asking the questions. As always, it's such a diverse, such an intricate and entwined and complex subject. We weren't really able, we just kind of touched the surface. We'll probably have one of these meetings probably once a month for the next 6 months. We might actually get some real fact and information out. But I hope you've enjoyed the evening. I hope you've picked up some information and perhaps given some impetus to our political parties here to kind of really get going and really take this something that's just so serious. It's so serious, really, that we should, we've got to deal with it. But thank you very much for coming, and I'd like to